Imagine being treated unfairly in front of your entire class, humiliated by the very person meant to guide and inspire you. That's exactly what happens to Ethan, a quiet and respectful student, who finds himself on the receiving end of his teacher's unjust behavior. But here's the twist. What the teacher doesn't know is that Ethan isn't just any student. He's the son of the school's principal. As the tension builds, Ethan's classmates exchange shocked glances, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. Meanwhile, the teacher, oblivious to the storm brewing, continues her harsh lecture. What happens next will leave everyone stunned. Will the truth come out? And how will the principal react when he discovers what his son has endured? Stay tuned to uncover the unexpected twists in this gripping story. Ethan sat quietly at his desk, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, had singled him out for a minor mistake, raising her voice and accusing him of not paying attention. The other students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react. Some whispered among themselves, but most avoided eye contact, afraid of becoming her next target. What Mrs. Carter didn't know was that Ethan had been having a tough week. His dad, the principal, had been working long hours, leaving little time for their usual chats. Ethan had been doing his best to keep up in class, but the pressure was mounting. As Mrs. Carter's reprimand grew harsher, Ethan clenched his fists under the desk. He wasn't sure what hurt more, her words or the judgmental looks from his classmates. Something had to give. As the class moved on, Ethan tried to focus, but Mrs. Carter's words still rang in his ears. He felt the weight of everyone's eyes, some filled with sympathy, others with curiosity. Why had she been so harsh? Ethan wasn't the kind to cause trouble, and deep down, he knew he hadn't done anything wrong. Yet here he was, made to feel small over something so trivial. Meanwhile, a group of students near the back exchanged whispers. One of them, Mia, nudged her friend, Jake, and said, "Isn't that the principal's son?" Jake nodded, his eyes wide. They both watched, wondering if Mrs. Carter had any idea who she was dealing with. But Mrs. Carter remained oblivious. She continued her lesson, her stern tone unwavering. Ethan, however, couldn't shake the growing thought. Should he tell his dad, or let it go? The school bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, but the tension lingered in the air. Ethan gathered his things quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He felt a mix of emotions, anger, hurt, and confusion. As he walked out, a few students whispered behind him, their curiosity growing. Mia and Jake exchanged glances, debating whether they should say something. Mrs. Carter, meanwhile, remained in the classroom, oblivious to the ripple effects of her actions. She had no idea that her stern outburst would soon come back to haunt her. Ethan wandered down the hallway, his mind racing. Should he let this slide, or was it time to stand up for himself? Unbeknownst to him, Mia had already decided to do something. "We should tell someone," she whispered to Jake. Jake hesitated, then nodded. Something big was about to unfold. Ethan walked to the library, hoping some quiet time would help clear his mind. He didn't notice Mia and Jake slipping away in the opposite direction, heading straight to the principal's office. They hesitated outside the door for a moment before knocking, unsure how to start the conversation. Inside, Principal Carter looked up from his desk, surprised to see two students. "What can I do for you?" he asked kindly. Mia and Jake exchanged nervous glances before Mia spoke up. "It's about Ethan. Something happened in class today." Meanwhile, back in the library, Ethan's heart sank as he spotted Mrs. Carter walking in. She hadn't seen him yet, but her expression was tense, like someone who had just been confronted. Did someone tell her who he was? Or was something else brewing? Ethan stayed hidden, his pulse quickening. Mrs. Carter's sharp footsteps echoed in the quiet library as she searched the shelves, her frustration evident. Ethan crouched low behind a table, unsure if he should reveal himself or stay hidden. Before she could spot him, the door opened and Principal Carter entered, followed closely by Mia and Jake. Mrs. Carter froze, her face paling as she recognized the principal's stern expression. "Mrs. Carter," Principal Carter began, his voice calm but firm, "I've just been informed about what happened in class today. Can you explain why my son Ethan was treated so unfairly?" Mrs. Carter stammered, realizing too late who Ethan was. I didn't know he was your son," she muttered, trying to defend herself. "That's not the point," Principal Carter interrupted. "Every student deserves respect, no matter who they are." Ethan finally stood up, his voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside him. "I wasn't going to say anything, but I think it's important that no one else has to feel the way I did today." Mrs. Carter's shoulders slumped as she realized the impact of her actions. Principal Carter's tone softened but remained resolute. "Let this be a lesson to us all about fairness and understanding." As they left the library, Ethan felt a weight lift off his chest. But just as he turned the corner, Mia whispered to Jake, "Did you hear? Mrs. Carter might be transferred." Ethan overheard, his eyes widening. It seemed the story wasn't over yet. The next day, Ethan walked into class feeling lighter. Mrs. Carter greeted the students with a noticeably softer tone. Though she didn't directly address what had happened, her demeanor had changed. Ethan could tell she was making an effort, and that for now was enough. During lunch, Mia and Jake joined Ethan at his table. "You okay?" Mia asked. Ethan nodded, offering a small smile. "Thanks for speaking up. I don't know if I could have done it alone." Word spread quickly about Mrs. Carter's close call with being transferred. It served as a quiet reminder to everyone, teachers and students alike, that actions have consequences. As Ethan left school that afternoon, he spotted his dad waiting outside. "Proud of you," Principal Carter said, ruffling Ethan's hair. Ethan smiled, knowing he had stood up for himself, and others too.